In my hand is something very special. It's pretty bad to be so bad at something that you become famous for, but this little piece of cardboard from 1994 has managed to do the impossible. In today's video, we'll be talking about the strange history behind this card, why it's bad, and if it deserves the reputation that it has. This is the story of Wood Elemental, Magic the Gathering's worst card ever. Creatures in the early days of Magic were infamously terrible, especially compared to artifacts and instants. This has led to a lot of creatures nowadays being way stronger than their older counterparts. And unfortunately, Wood Elemental is one of the biggest victims of these stronger creatures. But that's not to say it was good even back in the 90s. This card has always been terrible. For 1 green mana and 3 mana of any other color, you can cast this elemental spell. It's a creature that comes in with a variable power and toughness. In the bottom right corner, there are stars, and those stars are equal to the number of untapped forests you sacrifice when Wood Elemental enters the battlefield. Now, untapped is a very important word in this card. When a land is untapped, that means you haven't gotten the mana to use to cast spells from that land. So whenever Wood Elemental enters the battlefield, if I wanted to enter as a 1/1 creature, I could sacrifice my last untapped forest, put it into my graveyard, and have Wood Elemental enter the battlefield as a 1/1 creature. Having to sacrifice your lands for a card usually makes a card completely unplayable. But usually when you have to sacrifice a land, you can tap it first, get the mana from that land, and then sacrifice the land. And you can still use that mana at least for that turn. Wood Elemental specifies untapped lands. If you wanted to cast Wood Elemental but also wanted to get the mana from your land, you would have to choose one or the other. So essentially, you're paying 5 mana for a 1/1. And that's it. You would think that if you had to sacrifice lands and completely destroy your game plan, that Wood Elemental would come in with some crazy buff. But nope. That's the entire card. It comes in, you gotta sacrifice lands, not even get the mana from them, just for a creature with no abilities. And if you choose to not sacrifice any lands, it dies immediately. To really put it into perspective how bad this card is, let's compare it to another card with the exact same mana cost, Ambassador Oak. Ahem. When Ambassador Oak is put into play, put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token into play. And Ambassador Oak itself has 3 power and 3 toughness. So you get 2 creatures for 4 mana with a total of 4 power and 4 toughness. For the same price, Wood Elemental makes 1 creature, and if you don't sacrifice any of your forests, it comes in as a 0/0 and dies immediately. If you were to pay 8 mana for your Wood Elemental, that would be paying 4 for the casting cost and then sacrificing 4 forests, you would get a single 4/4 creature with no abilities. If you were to pay 8 mana for 2 Ambassador Oaks, you would get 2 3/3s and 2 1/1s, which is 8 total power and toughness. And you don't lose your lands, so you can use them again on later turns. And I want to make it very clear, Ambassador Oak is not a good card, but, and this is very important, it isn't detrimental to the player who casts the spell, unlike Wood Elemental. If we look at a card like Questing Beast, which has a very similar mana cost to Wood Elemental, it's not even a competition. All of these downsides and all of these factors have led Wood Elemental to being one of the biggest jokes in Magic the Gathering history. But despite all the negative things that I've said, despite all of its drawbacks and flaws, there's exactly one deck type that Wood Elemental might be good in, and that's a land sacrifice deck. There are some decks that benefit from sacrificing its own lands. Usually these decks work by putting a bunch of lands into the graveyard and then bringing them all back at once. When all of these lands return to the battlefield, a bunch of triggered abilities happen that can basically win you the game. These kinds of decks can be very powerful, but even then, Wood Elemental is useless. Because, like I said before, specifying untapped forests makes this card unplayable. In land sacrifice decks, before you sacrifice a land, you'll float the mana. You'll want to tap your lands, get the mana, and then sacrifice them, so you at least have the mana for turn. Wood Elemental doesn't let you do that. You just have to get rid of them. But if you're broke like me, you may be thinking, hey, well, Scapeshift is like 20 bucks. Maybe Wood Elemental is a good budget option, even if it's a lot worse. But Wood Elemental is also 20 bucks. This card is on the reserved list, which means it's on a list of cards that will never be reprinted, so because of that, its price has skyrocketed. This card isn't even cheap. Why did I buy this thing? I really have no idea why our wooden friend here was given so many restrictions with no payoff or upside at all. The card is forever destined to sit in bulk bins and never be put into anybody's deck. It's tragic in all honesty. These cards are meant to be played, and this one is just completely unplayable. I'm not sure if I could make a worse card if I tried. Good thing I don't have to, because Wizards of the Coast has made cards worse than this. Joining me today is Jordan from EDH Jank Center. Me and EDH Jank Center have both found 3 cards from the history of Magic that are worse than Wood Elemental, and we will be revealing our top 3 to each other. Let's talk about some cards that are somehow even worse than Wood Elemental. How you doing today, man?
Hey, what's going on, man? I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Today, me and you have supposedly found 3 cards we find somehow worse than the iconic Wood Elemental.
Indeed.
Would you like to go first?
Yeah, no, I will take that positioning if you'll allow me. So my number 3 card worse than Wood Elemental is Confront the Past. This is an X and a black sorcery lesson from Strixhaven. It says, choose one. Return target planeswalker card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Remove twice X loyalty counters from target planeswalker and opponent controls. I love cards. Clearly, my whole channel is based around underloved, janky, budget cards that, you know, we try to highlight and create upside for. And this card also has that. However, I just never see planeswalkers. I just don't see them on the field. And even when they do get on the field, after that it just gets completely hated off the field. I would say that this is the best in a Super Friends deck because you can return a planeswalker straight to the battlefield from your graveyard, which is nice. Even then, I think there's way better options for recursion for those kinds of decks in the format.
Yeah, this is one where it needs a target that's very specific, and that target doesn't come up a lot. That'd be like if this targeted battles.
Yeah, exactly. This sort of just falls by the wayside. It's very narrow, and that second ability is almost useless unless you're playing in like a very planeswalker heavy meta. The thing is, I think they're so good. They are good. That's why people don't want them on the field, is because a lot of them, their ultimate abilities lead to some very scary things, and you don't want to let that person just accumulate value until they can ult the planeswalker. I never think to run planeswalkers, so I'm just never really considering this card, and I just don't think a lot of other deck builders do either. It's just very narrow, and I think at least Wood Elemental is able to be good in a couple of different kinds of builds. It's just too narrow, even in a Super Friends build. Not stellar, but I love it though. What's your number 3, bro?
All right, my number 3, and this is the only creature that I think is somehow worse than Wood Elemental, is Zephyr Spirit. This is a 5 and a blue 0/6. Whenever you block with it, which is obviously what it's designed for, it goes back to your hand. Now, yeah, that'll prevent a lot of damage, but whenever it costs that much mana and you have to recast it every single time just to have a blocker, or there's 1 mana 0/5 crabs. Like, what are we doing?
First idea off the rip, looking at this card, I would say like, okay, we're looking at a big butt. It's got a lot of toughness, so how do we use that to our advantage? So something like Arcades, the strategist who likes creatures with big toughness, would be nice. There are places where you can use these cards if you want to, and especially if you're building on a budget, those kinds of selections will help you still play with some level of like viability and power and remain under your budget and not have, you don't have to, the whole point is you don't have to break your bank to play this game and enjoy playing it.
There's one, maybe 2 scenarios where you could, sure, chuck it in just for fun. It's a cent. You won't be losing anything out of it. Like, this could be a 2-drop very easily, a 3-drop at worst, and it would still not be good, but it would be playable maybe in certain very specific archetypes.
Speaking of not good, shall we move to number 2?
Yeah, what are you looking at for number 2?
This one's from 2001. It's Aven Shrine. So it's 1 white enchantment. Whenever a player casts a spell, that player gains X life, where X is the number of cards in all graveyards with the same name as that spell. Let's look at this from a commander lens, because that's basically what I'm always playing. Commander, as we all know, if you don't know, is a singleton format, which means that there can be no repeat cards in the 99 of your deck aside from basic lands, and or cards that say a deck can have any number of cards named X.
And there's what, like 8 of those in total? There's not many.
There aren't many, no. Talk about narrow, like this is even more narrow than Super Friends. You have to overly commit to this specific strategy in order for it to be even viable at all.
And especially in white, where it's like, white doesn't have a lot of graveyard help. That's not really their thing.
And Aven Shrine, I don't know. I love it. Don't get me wrong. It's fun. And like, it makes me want to build those kinds of things because I think there's a lot of interesting ways to build those kinds of decks. It's really cool and creative. And I love that kind of stuff. But compared to the big old Wood Elemental, it's clear to me which one's better. This is just a enchantment that sits there and does one thing. Wood Elemental lets you put some lands in the graveyard if you're running that kind of strategy, and it becomes a huge creature. That being said, this will be a great card for Templar Knights decks. A great card. All right, my friend, what about you?
Oh god, my number 2, and I really thought I might put this at number 1, but this is the Racko.
Never seen this before in my life.
Yeah, no, I had never seen it either until very recently when I was looking up stuff for this video. This is a 6 mana colorless artifact. You pay 2 more to prevent 1 damage to any creature or player. It also gets to return to your hand.
Oh man.
If this prevented like 10 or even 5, it might have gotten off this list. 1. And especially in Commander, where 1 damage is, you're going to take a little bit more than 1, I feel like. Yeah, I prevent 1 damage. I live on -7 life. It does nothing.
My first impulse would be to like find something that really cares about casting artifacts, or find some way to like some way way to abuse that. And again, it won't be the most efficient version of whatever that is. But yeah, that's the only way I can really think of it, at least at the moment.
I can't think of anything this goes in either. Like, I really tried. I tried finding something artifact-based that it could do. I couldn't think of anything. All right, well, would you like to reveal your number 1 to me?
You know what? This is a card that I recently did, and I would love to talk about it, Callum.
You would love to talk about it.
I am going to talk about Alcor's Tomb.
What in the world?
It's an artifact. You can pay 2 and tap it. Target permanent you control becomes the color of your choice. This effect lasts indefinitely. So basically, you just pay 2, and you can make something of yours. If it's red, you make it blue permanently. That's it.
So much versatility. How could this card be bad?
Well, there are a ton of color switching cards like this in Magic's past. And like maybe in the past they had some bearing on the game, but in today's game, especially through a commander lens, they just don't do a lot. Wood Elemental, even today, could change the state of a game when combined with commanders like Titania. This is another case of you have to commit to building a deck around this, which is its own type of fun, but still is a lot, and Wood Elemental is just strictly better.
It's a hard sentence to say out loud, but yeah, you found something, I think.
I think I did too. I think I did.
Oh god. Well, my number 1, it's also bad because it's hard to understand when you first read it. This is my number 1. This is called Fasting. 1 white mana. It's an enchantment. The card itself says you may choose to skip your draw phase. Then, if you do that, you get to draw 2 life. And if you draw a card for any reason, so if you draw a card, if someone forces you to draw a card, any reason, Fasting is destroyed. And during your upkeep, you get to put a hunger counter on Fasting. And when he has 5 or more hunger counters, then it's destroyed. Let's keep this in mind. When it comes onto the battlefield, you don't even gain 2 life because it's only at your draw phase. It comes on the battlefield and then does nothing. And then on your next turn, you say, hey, I don't want to draw a card. Instead, I want to gain 2 life. You do it again, and you do it again. And if nobody forces you to draw cards, or you don't break the fast yourself, you're not going to draw cards for 5 turns.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's clearly meant for like 1v1s where each player had 20 life, and choosing not to draw a card and gain 2 life might have been a viable strategy back then. But what's interesting about this is that it says may. You may choose to skip your draw step, which you don't have to, which means that you would be paying 1 mana to just have an enchantment that accumulates counters and goes to the graveyard after that. Because in Commander, you're gonna choose to draw cards most of the time. There's maybe a few decks where like that could work, but yeah, this is it's certainly not meant for this time.
Yeah, well, and just thinking about it in Commander 1, there's always the archetype of group hug where you're gonna be forced to draw cards. There's so many cards that'll make you draw cards, and drawing cards, as you know, is probably the strongest thing you can do in Magic. More cards, more options. Gaining life is arguably the weakest mechanic in Magic. So whenever you're skipping the strongest thing you can do for the weakest thing you can do for 5 turns, I'm gonna have a problem with it. I can't think of one scenario where I'd rather gain 2 life at my upkeep instead of draw a card.
It's just a lot for not a lot of benefit. You'd have to run this in something very, very, very specific for it to even have any bearing on a game. And Wood Elemental, again, could come in and make an immediate difference in the specific build it's meant for. I think you're fully correct. This is definitely worse than Wood Elemental. You got my stamp of approval.
Well, thanks for being on the channel. I appreciate you helping me find some terrible cards to laugh at for half an hour.
Of course, man. Thank you for having me on. Y'all make sure you subscribe to Callum's Cards on YouTube, man.
Huge thank you to Jordan for helping me with this video. If you want to go subscribe to his channel, you can just find him at EDH Jank Center on YouTube. I'll leave a link to his channel at the very top of this description. As you may be able to tell, not every card in Magic the Gathering is gonna be the strongest card ever made, and especially not cards that were made in the infancy of Magic the Gathering. But I think that's part of the beauty of a game like Magic. It's been around for 31 years now, and yet we're still going back to these cards from the 90s and just laughing at them. You could see the evolution of design change, the improvements made to creatures, and the nerfs made to artifacts and other cards. And yeah, some cards are going to end up being as bad as Wood Elemental. It's bound to happen eventually as people want to be creative with their card designs. But what something like Wood Elemental shows to me is that they're able to adapt and learn from their past mistakes. And that's something really important for a game like Magic where you need to have fresh new ideas all the time. We can't just be stuck with the same overpowered cards forever and ever. It would make the game stale and really boring. And as fun as it is to use really good cards, terrible cards like Wood Elemental are almost as fun to play because of how bad they are. Playing one of these in a Commander game will certainly get a laugh out of your friends because it's just absurd. Will we ever see a card as bad as Wood Elemental ever again? Probably not. But if a card is gonna be terrible, useless, unplayable, and a design failure, I'd rather it be so bad like Wood Elemental that I can at least bring it up and laugh with my friends in a playgroup. Because for me, Magic is about community, and if a terrible, janky, useless card is one way to bring my friends closer together and have a good laugh, that's good enough for me. Have a good life in my trade binder, Wood Elemental. You deserve it. But you're definitely not going into any of my decks. Thanks for watching.